All right, welcome back to part 2 of my NBA mock expansion draft. If you missed part 1, make sure to go back and watch that. That goes through all the rules, all the protections for all the 30 teams. But part 2 is all going to be about the draft itself. So we are going to jump right into it. As always, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Plenty more videos coming this summer that you won't want to miss. All right, let's throw up on the screen some of the eligible players that could be picked in this year's mock expansion draft. Again, if you want to go back in part 1, if you missed it, I do more of a breakdown of which players would be picked, which ones wouldn't. But these are most of the players that would be eligible. It's not a full comprehensive list. I didn't include players that I didn't think were worth talking about or worth selecting. But there's a good amount of players on this list. I have 80 players that I think are at least worth a conversation on if they could be selected. Obviously, not all of these players will be selected. The big rule here, again, is only one player can be selected per team. So that's good for teams like the Thunder, as we can see. Teams like the Timberwolves, the Grizzlies, the Magic. They only lose one player. So even if they have a couple good players, they only lose one. And you'll see there's a pretty good variety of players on this list. You have some veterans, you have some role players, you have some promising young pieces. So a good mix of players that are eligible, and I think that's going to make for a pretty interesting draft. So now that we have a good list of players that are eligible to be selected, let's jump into the draft. I am going to rotate picks between Seattle and Vegas. More than likely, the logistics of it would be probably a coin flip to decide who gets first pick. I'm going to do my imaginary coin flip, and shocker, it's going to fall to Seattle. As a Seattle fan, as a Sonics fan, ever since I was young, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Sonics are going to get the first pick. Las Vegas will get the second pick. More than likely what will happen, and we're going to do this right at the end, is depending on where they get slotted in the NBA draft, whoever doesn't win the expansion draft pick probably gets the first pick or the first selection between the two in the NBA draft. So we'll give Vegas the first selection in the NBA draft. We'll talk about that at the end. Seattle will go second. But Seattle is up first. Of the 80 guys to choose from, there's, again, a decent amount of choices. You get some variety. But to me, one guy stands out. And you can maybe guess it. Again, some people might disagree. But I think the number one player you have to pick isn't a veteran. There's going to be a few that we'll select throughout this draft. But I think has the most potential to grow with this expansion team. And to me, you have to go to the team with the most players eligible to be picked. And that is the Oklahoma City Thunder. And the Sonics probably have a lot of joy taking one player from the Thunder after they stole their team 17 years ago. I have the Sonics selecting Nikola Topic with the first overall pick in the mock expansion draft. To me, that's the clear number one. He's the guy, like I said, that has the most potential to grow with this expansion team. But if that were the case, it would probably be a divisive pick. Because Topic has never played in the NBA. He was a rookie last year for the Thunder, tore his ACL before the season started, missed all of the season. So we've never seen him play actual NBA basketball. But before he tore his ACL, that was right before the 2024 draft, he was projected to be potentially a top 5 pick last year. Then he tears his ACL. That was his second knee injury. Not the greatest, but if his medical comes back clear, the Sonics will get a potential top 5 player in a draft who's not even 20 years old yet. There is certainly some risk in picking a player that's never been on the court. But if we're talking upside, which I think you have to go with when we're talking an expansion draft, I think Topic is the selection. So Topic goes number 1 to Seattle. That brings us to Vegas's first overall pick. They're going to go a slightly different route. I think they're going to go to a veteran who is still a good player. The reason he is eligible is probably his contract. But I'm going to go with Jeremy Grant for the first overall pick for Las Vegas. A lot of this is the contract. He's owed $30+ million over the next 3 years. I think that's good enough reason for Portland to say, yeah, you know what, we're okay. But I don't think that means Jeremy Grant is just a bad player. And if you're deciding between Jeremy Grant and Paul George, who might be some people's first overall pick, contract is going to play a factor in a lot of these picks. Jeremy Grant is owed $30+ million for 3 years, which is a lot. Paul George is in the $50 millions. So just from a contract standpoint, Jeremy Grant, Paul George is going to have more of the upside. Jeremy Grant, I think, is going to have a little bit higher floor And I think Vegas, for that reason, goes with him. Still a good player. You're paying him probably a little bit more than he deserves, but salary cap, not really a huge factor for an expansion team. So Jeremy Grant, I think, is the pick for Vegas. That brings us to round 2, Sonics' second pick. I'm going to go with Paul George. The reasons I just mentioned are reasons why an expansion team might not pick him at all. He's owed $50 plus million over the next 3 years. He is on the wrong side of 30. I don't really want to be paying Paul George $50 plus million into his mid-30s, especially since he can't really stay on the court and he's had a bad history of injuries. But like I just said, salary cap for an expansion team, not as much of a factor as other teams. And this, I think, is one of the reasons, again, the 76ers probably are okay letting Paul George go, is the 76ers have lots of other guys that need to be paid. Expansion team, they have salary cap to work with. And so I think if you're an expansion team, you're trying to come up with ways to make big swings. And the Sonics, I think, are a good example of this. Topic could be really good. He also could be a bust. Paul George, same thing. His ceiling, at least for the next year or two, could be an all-star level wing. He also could get hurt and mess up your salary cap. But I think that's the swings that some expansion teams might take. So I think Paul George could go really high or could just not be picked at all. I have him picked second by the Sonics. Vegas, with their second selection, I'm going to have go another veteran route. And this is where it's going to kind of be clear. There's going to be two different paths that these expansion teams are taking. And I think that's something to note. Each team isn't just picking the best player available. They're not just picking on talent. They are building a team, and you have to build a team that works well together. And so I'm going to showcase two different ideas or two different frameworks for building a team. One team, as you can notice with the Sonics, is going to be a little bit more of a risk. They're going to go a little bit more high upside. It's going to be a little bit riskier. Both Topic, Paul George, riskier picks. And they're going to be more focused on some more up-tempo. We want to see a lot more offense, a lot more skill. That's what you're going to notice with Seattle. With Vegas, before we get to their second overall pick, they're going to go more on the veteran route. They're going to be more of a defensive-minded team. A lot of either veterans or young players that can play both sides of the ball and make it just a really hard team to play. And so if we're talking team framework, that's the framework for both teams. With that in mind, I have Vegas selecting John Collins with their second overall pick. So Jeremy Grant, John Collins, back-to-back. Two veterans, two solid wing players that, if you ignore their contract, are just good NBA players. And there's some argument that John Collins may not even be available. I mentioned in part 1, I don't really know what his value is at this point. He was available for 10 years in Atlanta, it seemed like. Utah looks like they're okay trading him. So I don't really know what his value is. All I know is he's a solid NBA player. So him and Jeremy Grant, I think, are two good back-to-back picks. That brings us to round 3. And the Sonics, I think, go back to another young player. Outside of Topic, I don't think there's a ton of young players that have higher potential. Most of those players, they're going to be protected. But one of those guys that I think still fits the category is from the Memphis Grizzlies, and that's Vince Williams Jr., who I have being selected in the 3rd round. You might think this is a little early for Vince Williams. Memphis is one of those teams that has a decent amount of players to be picked. Because of that, if you like one of those players, you probably got to pick them early. And as I mentioned, Vince Williams is still young, injury-riddled campaign last year. But 2 years ago, he was a solid starter. And on a young Memphis team, he stood out at times. And so I think you take that risk if you're Seattle to try to find someone on a similar timeline to Topic that you can build around. And so it goes back to that framework. Seattle's going to be a little riskier, but if it all works out, they have some talented players. Vegas, with their 3rd pick, going back to just some good veteran basketball players, they're going to go Caleb Martin with their 3rd pick. Dallas has some interesting pieces to choose from. You could argue Klay Thompson. You could also argue that he may be past his prime, not really worth taking. Caleb Martin, in the same realm of John Collins and Jeremy Grant, are just really good role players. And he's shown that in Miami, shown that a little bit in Philly, and then his half stint in Dallas. He's still a good player. He fits in what Vegas is trying to do, so he's their 3rd pick. Moving to the 4th round, Seattle's going to take one of the more interesting players that is eligible to be picked in this year's mock expansion draft, and that is Jordan Poole, who was initially on the Wizards. He has since been traded to New Orleans, but this would have happened before the NBA offseason. So Jordan Poole of the Washington Wizards gets selected in the 4th round. I think this fits in with Seattle's framework. When he's on, he's a really fun, still somewhat young player. When he's off, it's not great, and you are paying him probably a little bit too much, but he provides some offense. He's going to provide some flair, some skill. Jordan Poole, I think, is worth being picked sometime in the first few rounds, so he goes 4th to Seattle. Vegas, with their 4th pick, goes their first big man, and really the first big man of the draft. I have Neemias Queta of Boston being picked in the 4th round. Maybe not the biggest name, maybe not a really enticing skill set, but when he needed to play in Boston, whenever Porzingis was out, whenever Al Horford needed a break, Queta stepped in and looked actually really good. And so I think this is one of the situations where you kind of take a player who didn't have a big role on their team and you put him in an expansion draft in potentially a starting role, and you could get a really good player. And so I think there's argument Queta could even be picked further up. I really like him. I think he goes 4th to Vegas, fits in with their style of play as well. So Queta goes 4th to Vegas. 5th round, I think Seattle goes big after Vegas selects Queta. And they're going Luka Garza, who, formerly of Minnesota, did just get signed with Boston. But I think in this alternate universe, I think Seattle picks him up. Everyone knows him from college. He was a great college player, kind of the Jokic of college basketball. That hasn't necessarily translated to the NBA, but I think he's still young enough. He still has some tools that he's worth taking. And if you look at the first 5 picks for Seattle, not a lot of defense. And we're going to talk about their whole roster once we get to the end. But from an offensive standpoint, they've got some fun pieces. And I think Garza fits in with that. With Vegas's 5th pick, I have them taking their first point guard. I have them taking Vasilije Micic. He's an older point guard. He was an older rookie when he finally came over to the NBA. But I think if you give him the opportunity on what's probably going to be not a great team, he's a fun point guard to kind of run your offense. And Seattle already has their way younger version in Nikola Topic. But Micic brings similar things. He's a little bit taller of a point guard, has some size, can run your offense. And the ceiling might not be there. And again, he's already in his early 30s. But I think if you give him a decent amount of your offense, it's going to be fun to watch. So Micic gives a little bit of some offensive flair to this Vegas team. Up to the 6th round, Seattle has picked a lot of fun offensive players. I think they need some grit. I think they need some defense. I'm going to go with the Golden State Warriors' Gui Santos, who isn't someone who gets a ton of minutes for the Warriors, but anytime he's out there, I just like his minutes. And I think if you kind of throw him into this Seattle team, I think he gives you toughness. I think he gives you a little bit of defense, a little bit of rebounding. And you can make the argument maybe Buddy Hield should be the selection. But I think Seattle's got plenty of offense. They need someone like Gui Santos who can come in, give you some minutes off the bench, just be a solid contributor. And he's still relatively young too. So I think that's why he gets picked maybe a little bit higher than you would think. I really like him out of Golden State. He is the 6th pick for Seattle. Vegas' 6th pick is a shooter, gives them a little bit more offense, and is someone that I didn't necessarily think NBA teams still valued, but we have the benefit of hindsight because the NBA offseason has just kicked off, and he just got a decent sized contract. So I think he's still valuable. I have Vegas selecting Duncan Robinson. He'd be a great shooter off the bench. Detroit just gave him a lot of money to probably replace Malik Beasley. So a good shooter. He has his flaws for sure, but it's very clear what he provides. So I think he gets picked somewhere in this mock draft. Round 7, I have Seattle going to the Indiana Pacers, which is one of the teams that I spent a lot of time talking in part 1. Should TJ McConnell be available? Should he not? I mentioned in part 1, I think he will be made available, but I also don't think he will be picked. And that's nothing to do with how great he was throughout this playoffs, but just due to his age, just due to his size, his kind of past performance. I don't think he will be picked, not because I don't think he's a decent pick, but I think they have a more valuable player that is eligible, and that is Johnny Furphy, who I think gets picked here in round 7. He's only 20 years old, didn't get a ton of run as a rookie in Indiana, but I liked him. I liked him back in college. I liked him in spurts with Indiana, and I think Seattle takes a swing here in round 7, picks Furphy, a nice young athletic wing come off the bench for them. Vegas' 7th round pick is one of my personal favorite players throughout the NBA. I've been a fan ever since he was young. I've been a fan throughout his various and numerous injuries, which he's certainly had throughout his career. I have Vegas selecting Jonathan Isaac from the Orlando Magic. Isaac's going to be one that people are going to be split on, and I'm sure people would be split in an expansion draft war room. On the one hand, he's one of the best defenders still in the NBA. He has length. He's somehow still only 27. But the problem is going to be his injuries. The problem is going to be him staying on the court and being able to provide impact outside of a 15 minutes a game. And I think because of that, he falls a little bit, but I still think he's worth taking a chance on. And this Vegas team that's building out a lot of good defensive-minded players, I think Jonathan Isaac fits what they're trying to do. So he gets picked here in round 7. Round 8, I have the Sonics taking Kevin Huerter, who is now on Chicago. Just one of those players that when he's right and hitting his shots, he's a good player. When he's not hitting his shots, he kind of bounces around, which is what he's done the past few years. But I think is a good example of just a good expansion draft player. He's going to be a solid rotation piece for them. He can hit some shots. He can provide some leadership. I think he gets picked somewhere in these middle rounds. So Kevin Huerter, I have going 8th to Seattle. Vegas, with their 8th pick, I have them selecting Malachi Branham of San Antonio. I've loved Malachi Branham ever since he was at Ohio State. He's still kind of young, and I think if you give him some minutes, I think he'll be a solid piece for you. He doesn't have a ton of upside, hence why I think he falls to these middle rounds, but a good player. He's just kind of fallen out of the rotation in San Antonio. But I think for Vegas, he'd be a solid backup guard for them. Starting in round 9, I have Seattle going back to a big. They picked Luka Garza in round 5. I think they get a similar player in round 9. I have them taking Jock Landale of Houston. Similar players. You're not going to get a ton of defensive help with these two players. A little bit more offensive, but they have skill. They can kind of play off of each other. And Seattle would probably need a more traditional, maybe rim running big at some point. But those are two solid centers to have, and two centers that are still kind of young and can provide some offense for you. Both Garza and Jock Landale, I think, get picked at some point. Vegas, with their 9th pick, goes to LA. And no, they're not going to take Bronny James. They are going to take Jordan Goodwin, who signed a 2-way contract, I believe, to start, and played so well that the Lakers had to keep him long term. That's how good I think he played in limited minutes for them. And I think he's shown he can be a really good, high-energy defensive guard off the bench. And I think that's the role he plays for Vegas. So I have him being taken in round 9. Round 10, I have Seattle getting a little bit more of a rim running big, but also someone that, in theory, could develop for them to be a little bit more than just that. I have them taking Tyler Smith, the rim running big out of Milwaukee. He went to Overtime Elite, didn't have great results, didn't get picked very high, but in theory, he's a very enticing player. He's got some size, more of a maybe power forward, but he can rim run, he can shoot a little bit. He's still young, still hasn't shown much. He's going to be a work in progress, which I think is why he falls all the way to round 10. But someone that maybe Seattle can work with, and someone with some of their passers that they have might be able to work with a Tyler Smith. So I think he gets picked at some point, maybe a little bit further down, but still worth selecting. Vegas, they go to Cleveland and they select Jalen Tyson. Didn't get a ton of run for Cleveland this year, but when he did, I liked some of his minutes. He has a little bit of size, decent three-point shooter. I think towards the end of this expansion draft, we're going to start to get some of these players that maybe have some traits, maybe have some reason to be picked. There's going to also be reasons why they fell, not only out of the rotation for the teams that left them unprotected, but also start to fall in the expansion draft. And a lot of these players aren't even guarantees to be picked, aren't even guarantees to make the expansion team, but for one reason or another are worth taking for some of their skills. Jalen Tyson, I think, is a solid wing, solid bench player who can hit some threes. I think is worth taking a shot for Vegas in this round. Round 11, Seattle gets another big guy, a little bit bigger, a little bit more of a defensive presence, a little bit more rebounding. They get Zeke Naji from Denver. Look, when Naji played, it was a lot of times without Jokic. He was sometimes the one big to kind of give Jokic a spell. And as we all know, Denver did not play well when Jokic was off the floor. I don't think that's Zeke Naji's fault. He's a different type of big than Jokic is. He's obviously nothing to the caliber of Jokic. But I think in spot minutes, he's a solid big. And he can be in a big rotation. I mentioned Seattle has an interesting group of bigs that they've collected between Garza, Jock Landale, Tyler Smith a little bit. I think they need someone like Zeke Naji, so I think they take him in round 11. Vegas, with their 11th pick, takes Simone Fontecchio, now of Detroit. Fontecchio has bounced around a little bit. He was older when he came first to Utah a few years ago, but he's a wing that has some size, can shoot it a little bit. If you're 6'8" and can shoot and can move a little bit, you're going to at least get a shot. I think he gets a shot with Vegas. Whether or not he makes it, I think he's at least worth another shot. Round 12, Seattle's pick. I have them going Kobe Buffkin of Atlanta. Atlanta doesn't have a ton to choose from. That's why I think Kobe Buffkin is probably the clear choice. But I also think there's a reason he falls all the way to round 12. In the 2 years he's been in the NBA, it hasn't looked great. He's a smaller guard who has not shot well, has not looked good, but he's also only 21. So I think he does get a shot at one of these teams. Can he turn into a Jordan Clarkson kind of spark off the bench type player? Potentially. But I also think there's risk that he kind of starts to fall out of rotations. But he's only 21, so I do think he gets picked. In a very similar realm, Vegas is going to follow it up with a very similar pick. They're going to go Nick Smith Jr. of Charlotte. Also, an even smaller guard who has not played the best, but he is still young. So I think Seattle and Vegas swap young guards that still have some potential in round 12. Round 13, only a few more picks left. I have Seattle taking Jonathan Mogbo of Toronto. You could argue he might even go higher than this, and maybe he should have gone higher than this. He was a second-round pick of Toronto just last year. He's got size, he's got some athleticism, and he has a little bit of skill. And I think he's a perfect pick to go along with the bigs that I keep mentioning in Seattle that maybe have a little bit more to their game than just rim running like big traditional centers. And so I think he deserves to be picked potentially even earlier than I have him. I think he has potential. He's still young and fits in with what Seattle is doing inside. With Vegas's 13th pick, I have them taking Brandon Boston Jr. of New Orleans. He went to Kentucky, hasn't had too much success early on in the NBA. He will probably be one of those kind of tweener guard wings that maybe just don't ever put it all together, but he's still only 23. He's only a few years removed from playing on Kentucky, having some promise. So I think he gets picked probably towards the end of the expansion draft. Only a couple picks left. Round 14, Seattle's going to kick it off by taking one of the youngest players in this draft, one of the youngest players in the NBA in its entirety, and that's New York Knicks rookie Pacome Daddier. And he's only 19 years old. He has still a lot of room to grow, both literally and just on the court as well. So I think there's something there, but there's also high risk that he turns into nothing. I think that's why he falls a little bit. But when you're 6'7", 6'8", when you are still growing, when you are still only 19 years old, you're going to get a shot. And I think Seattle gives him a shot late in this expansion draft. Vegas, with their second to last pick in the draft, I have them taking Jalen Wilson, the young player from Brooklyn. He was an older rookie coming in. He was in college, it seemed like forever. He was a good college player. I don't know how much of that is going to translate in the NBA, but still young, despite coming in as an older rookie. Still has something I think is worth taking towards the end of this draft. And then final two picks in round 15. Only two teams left that haven't had a player taken. That is the Sacramento Kings and LA Clippers. I have Seattle taking potentially maybe not the right pick, but when we're all the way down to round 15, I don't know how much it really matters. I have them taking Markelle Fultz, who is the former number 1 pick, who has had lots of injury trouble, has bounced around. I don't know if he's going to continue his NBA career, but I think if he is, it would be fun to have him come back to Seattle. He went to University of Washington and honestly had a great college career. Everyone thinks of him as a bust or not the right pick for Philly. He was an electric college player. I think it would be fun to have him come back to Seattle, so I think he's the pick. And then Vegas finishes it out with their last pick being Kobe Brown. Another big, athletic, potentially kind of a tweener, not big enough to be a big. Don't know if he has the athleticism to be a full-on wing, but someone worth taking at that size. Kobe Brown goes 15th for Vegas. So that rounds out the mock expansion draft. Let's throw up all the picks one more time. A lot of fun names, a lot of names that I think would be immediate contributors, and some interesting pieces for both teams. Is it a full NBA roster? No. And I think as we've learned in past expansion drafts, both in the NBA and then more recently in the WNBA, these teams will then kind of supplement these rosters with the NBA draft and with free agency. And so quickly, let's just add a couple rookies to this because I think that may change the outlook of these teams. As I mentioned at the top, Seattle got the first pick. So then I think that means Vegas gets to pick in front of them in the NBA draft. No, I don't think that means they're getting the first overall pick. No, that doesn't mean Vegas would get Cooper Flagg. The rules state it's up to the commissioner. I think we can assume, based on past history and just kind of the nature of the NBA now, I would guess the expansion teams would pick 5th and 6th. I think they would leave the top 4 of the lottery. They would leave that alone. The expansion teams would slot in right behind that. So if we take this year's draft, which has already happened, we know the top 4 picks. We know it was Cooper Flagg, Dylan Harper to San Antonio, VJ Edgecombe to Philly, and then Con Knipple to Charlotte. That would mean that Vegas could take Ace Bailey, and I have them taking Ace Bailey 5th. Would slot in as one of the more talented players on their roster. I think he'd like to go to Vegas. He'd probably certainly prefer that over Utah. I think he's the pretty clear pick. And then I have Seattle taking Trey Johnson. Those just happen to be the 5th and 6th overall picks in the real draft. I think they stay. I think Bailey and Trey Johnson are 2 of the most talented players in the draft. So expansion teams, they just need talent. And I think those are 2 players that would slot right in. Second round, I think maybe is a little bit more up in the air. I'm going to make the case that the commissioner should give the first picks in the second round to the expansion teams. So I have Vegas picking 31 and Seattle picking 32. With the 31st pick, lots of ways they could go. If you look at their roster, Vegas, I think they need a little bit more size. They picked Neemias Queta, which I made the case, I think is a solid player, but they need a little bit more size. So I have them going Ryan Kalkbrenner of Creighton. He's going to bring a lot of size, a lot of defense, similar to a Walker Kessler in Utah. I think he's the pick at pick 31. And then looking at Seattle's roster, they need defense, and particularly they need some perimeter defense. I think that means that someone like a Sion James could come in and contribute right away. So I have Seattle taking Sion James out of Duke with their 32nd pick. Then obviously they would kind of supplement this with whatever free agents, with whatever trades they can make. But let's take a look just quickly at both rosters as they stand to get a sense of what an expansion team might look like. First, let's throw up Seattle. Topic, he would obviously be the clear standout, being the first overall selection. But there's a lot of fun pieces. You have Paul George, whatever he can give. You have Jordan Poole. You have rookie Trey Johnson. You have Vince Williams. You have both Luka Garza and Jock Landale. That's a fun center rotation. There's going to be a lot of fun games. There's also going to be a lot of rough, probably 130 to 120 games. But it's a fun team, and it's a team that has some young pieces you can build around if you're Seattle. Vegas is a little bit different. As I mentioned, they went a little bit more veteran heavy. They went a little bit more hard-nosed defense. And at times, this can be a hard team to play. Caleb Martin, Jeremy Grant, John Collins, those are 3 just veteran, solid pieces. They can all 3 play a little bit of defense. throw in Neemias Keita, throw in Jonathan Isaac, rookie Ryan Kalkbrenner. It's going to be a very defensive heavy team, but I also think they have some guys that can score. I think Jeremy Grant in lead roles, he can put up points. Micic is a fun distributor. Ace Bailey, I think, would have a big role on this team. So it's, again, another fun team that may have some rough offensive games, but I think that shows just how different expansion teams can be built. Seattle can build a fun offensive team. Vegas can build a little bit more of a two-way, veteran, tough-minded team. But I think that's the joy of expansion teams, is you can literally build a team from scratch, however you want it. And it's going to be fun whenever it happens. And that's really what makes it fun. And that's why we do mock expansion drafts. So those were the 2 expansion teams for 2025. As I mentioned in part 1, I want to continue this every year. I might even do it a couple times a year up until we actually get the expansion draft. So whether that's next year, whether that's a few years down the road, I'm going to be doing this every single year just to get a snapshot of what an expansion team might look like up until the actual team gets introduced. So if you liked this and wanted to see future iterations, make sure to subscribe. I've got other stuff coming too. I'm going to be doing my own trade value lists, not only for the NBA, but for other sports as well. I'm going to be doing some all-century teams in the year 2025 and just plenty more. So if you liked this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time.